Denmark, Trapped in Territoriality is the title. I will be talking about Denmark's borders. Well, the map is not quite even, which means the land border to Germany, the ferry crossing here, and also the Öresund border to Sweden. I will leave out Norway and the UK in the presentation today. There will be something in this little chapter or book what we are writing. If we look at history, Denmark has a history of being, which we have forgotten most of us, that it used to be a major European power until the 1800s, fighting with Sweden on domination of the northern European sphere, also very active in Germany, 30 Years' War and so on. Denmark is, borders means from European empire to small nation state. So there is this trauma of loss of territory, which comes up every now and then in Danish when something about history is coming up. But today the borders are not disputed. The Danish-German border has been disputed for a long time. The Swedish border has been disputed too. There is also this special issue with Denmark and Sweden and Norway that there is this imaginary that we are like the Nordic brethren. This Nordic cooperation thing, we are like them. Languages are comprehensible if you try. Whereas to Germany, there is a story or narrative of a cultural debordering. Like Denmark being perceived as part of the northern German Protestant culture since the Reformation, which the Danes or Danish national movement in the 19th century tried to get away from and saying, well, we are different, we're not like you. So there is this ideal today of a small state, Lille Denmark, on the one side. The other hand is a new development arguing, well, should Denmark be rather considered a metropolis in the global sphere instead of being a country, with Copenhagen being the center and the periphery being the suburbs? Because this is actually how many Danish politicians feel and how and Danish policies often work, very Copenhagen focused. A society very open to globalization in the large majority, saying we have to meet these challenges, we have to be competitive, and then this Danish model of flexicurity, which means a very flexible labor market with rather high salaries, also for low qualified labor, and the security of a welfare state that catches you and helps you to get back on the track if you fall out of this labor market, like become unemployed or sick or anything else. Challenges of the border today are these rebordering images here, and I have taken two pictures. This is from the land border of Germany. At the moment they already have a tent, it's a reborder, then we'll get some more containers now. This is the short period of pre-border control by private companies on the trains from Copenhagen to Malmö. Lydia had that on her presentation the other day. This passenger or carrier reliability on the trains, which meant that every train, and this is like a railway with up to 10 minutes interval, like it's a metro. But people had to get off, cross the bridge. They were pre-checked here by a private security firm, which even scanned IDs in the beginning, and then they could reboard on the train to Sweden. Funny thing is, many of these guys were actually ethnic Arabs that controlled, and there was, of course, to keep the refugees out. So I wondered whether that was a discussion in Sweden. I haven't found it, that many of these pre-clearance people actually were ethnic Arabs who could actually perhaps smuggle their ethnic fellows back. When we look at Denmark in Europe, Denmark is Germany and the EU, of course, very important for Denmark for trading and so on. And I have drawn this rather simple map here about the concepts we have when we talk cross-border regions and flows and so on. And we have the Greater Copenhagen and Scania, the former Öresund region, which has been renamed into Greater Copenhagen region. So Copenhagen, like taking southern Sweden in. We have, of course, the Greater Hamburg metropolitan region, which is the economic growth center in northern Germany. Then we have something called the String Metropolitan Cooperation between Hamburg, Copenhagen, and going up to Göteborg and Oslo. We have this Catalan Corridor as an infrastructure where most of the Danish exports are going down to Germany, and then there is the infrastructure of these new tunnel across the Baltic Sea, the Fehmarn Sound, which will connect Copenhagen to Hamburg. This is the cross-border framework we are working in. And then we also have region Schleswig, which I didn't draw because it's more a historical, cultural, political concept than a cross-border reality as an integrated region. Interesting too is when we look about trade. You remember from the previous map, this is where the infrastructure project is going on, but this is where things are happening. This is like goods, and this is also persons. So the traffic is actually on this Catalan Corridor, and not between Copenhagen and Hamburg. When we talk about Denmark and Sweden, we have this Öresund region concept, which is, has been promoted especially since the bridge opened in 2000, which is a functional debordering with this fixed link with accessibility by road and rail, because it's also train running 24/7 in a 20-minute interval. So it really opened up for a lot of opportunities, and it had a lot of political goodwill, especially in Copenhagen, on the Danish government. Cross-border integration, people moved around, they worked on the other side, they studied on the other side. So it really came very close to this European idea or concept of having like cross-border, integrated cross-border region. It was challenged by these Swedish controls, where I showed the picture, which were effectively, really in effect from January 16 to June 17. Formally they're still there, but now it's a very random thing, so it doesn't really interfere very much with the circulation, but it did in this time when we had these pre-checks and so on. But it's also challenged by Öresund was an even concept. Cross-border regions in Europe are supposed to be even concepts. Nobody's supposed to dominate the other side. When they have these assemblies, boards and so on, it's always 50-50, or if you have more partners, like 33%, so nobody should dominate this. But in Öresund, it is clearly that Copenhagen is dominating this. And it has been renamed. The Swedes have more or less accepted it, that it's now called Greater Copenhagen Area. Malmö has become a suburb of Copenhagen, Malmö being the third largest city in Sweden. Why did they accept it more in the end? I would argue because the development in Malmö has been fascinating. In the 1990s, before the bridge, it was a rundown post-industrial city, very grey, nothing going on, and today it is really a nice place to be. So they can see the advantage of being a suburb of Copenhagen. When we talk Germany, it's on the one side we have this market neoliberal thing, like Germany is the biggest Danish export market. So the Danes, or the Danish government, knows Germany is important on the one side. On the other side, the Danish young people do not study German anymore, just English. So there are some issues there, like the fear that we will not be able to sell our products on the German market anymore. So but the government has developed some strategies, like this is very important, Germany. And then there is, of course, the fixed link project, which is also a Danish thing. The Germans were never really interested in building that tunnel. The Danes wanted it so much, so the Germans said, okay, you build it, but you take the risk. So it's actually Denmark is constructing it. The toll will also go to the Danish state when it comes through. The Germans are only constructing some of the land infrastructure. It's an interesting project because the Danes totally misjudged the German planning processes, and the Danes are ready to build, and Germany is still handling all these complaints, and so it's interesting lesson about cross-border thing. And then on the land border, there is the border controls, which have not been lifted. They're still there, and they're very visible. And the newest thing is that you might have heard that Denmark is constructing a fence on the border, not to keep out the Germans or the refugees, but to keep out wild boars, because the fear of this African pork disease there. And Denmark, pork industry is very important. We have the Catalan Corridor is an interesting space of flow. It's not really formalized. There is a network. It's especially business promoting this. Because this is very vital for Danish export. Most of Danish industrial export is produced in this area here, and it all goes down to Europe, and it goes down mostly by truck, because the rail connection is, well, it's there, but there are too many passenger trains on it, so there's not really room for many freight trains. And then we have this little thing here, which is the Euro region on the land border, which had a very historic approach, because this used to be one united territory. It was only divided in 1920 by the new border after the First World War. But this historic dimension and this historic unity has been a lot of rhetoric, not so much in practice. There are still these cultural overlaps with national minorities. The border is, of course, it's a Schengen border, so it's practically open, but it's still very systemic. So when people try, or when authorities try to cooperate to get something going, they very quickly end up in all kinds of systemic issues, like what can we do across the border in law and so on. So when I call this a territorial trap, I would argue it's like two strings we have. We have on the land border these regional politics of cooperation with a lot of goodwill. No more taboos. There were a lot of taboos when this started about the Germans were dominated and so on. This has more or less gone if everybody is willing to do something together. But there is, on the other side, this security paradigm and these border controls, which are somehow symbolic, but they have had an influence on especially these goodwill Germans who wanted to cooperate with Denmark, because they feel somehow that they are not wanted, that they are locked out. And this is visible because in such a way that there is a kind of a standstill. It's not really moving forward. They have a lot of meetings and talk about how good the relations are, but when it comes to actual progress, nothing is happening, and some of the best practices are dismantled because there used to be like cross-border ambulance services and things like that. Each side is now building up the capacities themselves. It used to be like a bottleneck system, so they said, well, let's do some German ambulances, it's cheaper and more easy, but now they build up, everybody is building up their own infrastructure. There have been two new hospitals built, one on the German side and one on the Danish side, but it has never been, in this planning processes, nobody thought about doing this like in a cross-border way and think about what could the other side contribute, how could we do this together. So we have this systemic paradigm that we have an open border, we have a space of flows which is cross-border. But it's still two national systems. And in such a way they are also connected to territory, because the German system of administration and law and so on is finishing on the line, even though formal procedures might have been removed. And we have this security paradigm that domestic policy pressures from the center, Copenhagen, or agendas or Berlin, are pushed down on the border region, like where there is an interest of free markets and where you have local politicians who actually would like to have or keep the border open. The local mayors on the Danish side have argued against the border control, but it doesn't have any effect, because it's the national paradigms of security that decide, and they put this, and this is again the territoriality, they're arguing, well, the control is on the border, even though the threat is not on the border. I mean, the threat of this African pork disease will not stop at the border. It will cross the border anyway, even if they build a fence. It's more an epidemic thing you have to deal with. And the same applies to issues of terrorism, migration. They don't happen on the border, they happen somewhere else. And these, if there really was a threat on the border, the controls as they are now would not stop it. Because it's just some police standing at the important crossings, whereas the whole land border is open, and you could also cross by boat if you just wanted to get into Denmark. So territory has a symbolic role still when both countries try to defend or manifest or say where their borders are. Thank you.